Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is layers. We touched on layers last class just a little bit, but we're going to dive into this a little bit deeper. Can maybe someone that has a little bit of AutoCAD experience maybe just touch on why we use layers? Okay, and this very much relates to Photoshop and InDesign. You know, the overall concept is very much the same. Go ahead.
Separate everything, and it's going to be easier to put it like in the plan.
Mm-hmm.
And also it's going to give different specification or for each layer, like if you want to use different line weights, if you want to use different colors. So for each like block or line, you can use different layers.
So what he's saying is we're going to start to establish identity to all of the lines that we're creating. Okay. So right now we've drawn all of our lines on the zero layer. The zero layer is the default layer in AutoCAD that it gives you, but it's very common, and it's very common when you look at a professional architectural floor plan. You might see dozens, if not hundreds, of layers. Okay. You're going to have a layer for the exterior wall. You're going to have a layer for your windows. You're going to have a layer for your doors, your door swings. You're going to have layers for your interior walls. You can go on and on and on and on until you have dozens of layers, okay? And the other reason he mentioned was a word called line weight, okay? If you've ever looked at an architectural floor plan, which this is actually a floor plan from my Revit class. Let me just go to it real quickly. And let's start to analyze this floor plan. So when he mentioned the word line weight, what that means is that certain lines will have different thicknesses. Okay, so we've talked about similar terms when using Illustrator and using InDesign. We talk about using the stroke. Okay, the stroke is very similar to what a line weight is in AutoCAD, and I probably use both terms when I'm talking about Illustrator and InDesign as well. But when you look at this floor plan right here for this house that we created in my Revit class, notice the different widths of all of the lines, okay? The exterior walls are all a nice, dark, thick black line, okay? Can anyone tell me, besides you, because I know you know the answer, can anybody tell me why the exterior walls are thicker than, say, maybe the bed or some of the doors? Anybody? I know someone else in this class could answer it too because they're in my Revit class. Anybody? Okay, so the reason why that the exterior walls are darker is because if you're not familiar with what a floor plan actually is, a floor plan is as if you took, let's say, this room, for example, and you just cut it right down the middle, okay? And you're looking down at the space, okay? So what the thicker black line means is that this is an object that you are cutting through, okay? So as we can see in this space that we're in now, the walls are probably about, or the ceiling is probably about 12 feet tall, so are our walls and other parts of the building. So typically a floor plan is cut at 4 feet, okay? So if you're looking at a floor plan of this space, the cut plane is going to be somewhere around this location, okay? So all of the walls that you see that are nice and dark, that means that those walls continue up further beyond the floor plan that you're looking, okay? To whereas objects like the bed, objects like the tub that are not, they're very thin and very subtle lines, those are all objects that are below the cut plane, okay? So you might ask, why do you cut the floor plan at 4 feet? The reason why is because a majority of the objects that are inside your house are below 4 feet, okay? You look at kitchen counters, you look at tables, those are all between, 3.5 feet tops and lower, okay? Your bed, unless you have like a really high podium bed, is probably going to be below 4 feet. So you can see a majority of the objects in your floor plan cutting at 4 feet, including most window sills, obviously doors because they go up beyond 4 feet, etc. But if you look at this floor plan just for a second, you'll notice that you have various different types of line weights. You have these nice thick lines that represent the exterior walls. You have softer, more subtle gray lines that represent the hatch patterns, okay? Hatch patterns, which we'll learn how to create in just a few minutes, are going to be patterns like this concrete pattern that you see here, all this little dot stipple that you see right here. Well, you don't actually draw all of those little lines. You're just defining a perimeter around that space with this particular pattern inside of it. Okay, so we'll look at different hatch patterns today and what they mean. We'll use them to create floor tiles, wood floor patterns, etc. So it's a nice little tool to use so that you're not sitting there drawing all of these floor patterns, but it helps to provide your floor plan and all of your drawings some depth. Okay. You're looking at all these floor plans, you're looking at your elevations, your sections, you're looking at them in 2D. So you have to be able to take them to the kind of the next level to give them some depth and to give them some kind of architectural understanding to what it is that you're looking at. So any architect that looks at this floor plan can get a sense of how high things are depending on what the line weights are, okay? So typically the thickest line weights are going to be the objects that you're cutting through, and the thinner line weights are going to be objects that are most further away from you, okay? So if you're drawing an elevation, you might have objects that are, maybe 6 feet in front of where the elevation cut plane is, and you might have objects that are 15, 20, 50 feet back, okay? So the objects that are further away typically have the lightest and smallest line weights, okay? So, and we'll kind of look at what each of those are here in just a second. But this, looking at this floor plan here, this is a more complete floor plan. This kind of gives you an idea of the variety of different line weights that you have inside of a drawing, okay? Let's go back to AutoCAD. So let's look at how we're going to start to create some of these things. So earlier or actually about a week and a half ago before spring break, we talked about the layers palette, okay? You can go up here, you can click on this little drop-down menu and it will show you all of your layers. Currently, we only have one in place, all right? So we're going to go ahead and create a couple more. So if you just type in layer, all right, so LA, actually just LA would be the shortcut for layer. All right, and if you click on that or you hit enter, it will give you this little layer properties manager as it's stated over here on the left hand side. And from here you can see all of the different layer properties. You can assign line weights. You can start to create layers for all of the different components of your floor plan. Okay, if you go to the exercise 21, I've given you a few basic line weights that you can create here. The goal for this class is to maybe create 5 or 6 different line weights, okay? You don't need to, in my office, we probably have 30 or 40 different line weights that we use for our floor plans, but 4 or 5 will work just fine for you. Now you might have more layers, okay, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna have more line weights. So for example, a layer might be called exterior wall. The line weight is going to be blue, or the line color is going to be blue. The line weight is going to be 0.50 millimeters, okay? So that doesn't mean that you can't have other objects that have the same line weight in your floor plan, but we're going to kind of stick to a few basic ones just for the simplicity of this class. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a couple of these line weights. Let's give them some colors. And then a little bit later on in the lecture, I'm going to show you how to create a pen style. And what a pen style is you are creating a setting inside AutoCAD. You're creating an actual little file that has some basic layer instructions in it, so that when you plot your floor plan, this file says, okay, blue lines are equivalent to 0.5 millimeter, or I'm sorry, 0.5 millimeters. Light blue lines are equal to 0.35 millimeters, etc., etc. So it's a little bit, it's a tool that tells the plotter or the printer how big to make each of these lines. Okay, so we'll come back to that in just a few minutes. But let's go ahead and create a couple of our basic layers that we're going to use for our cabin. Okay. So if you come up to your layers property manager, you're going to see this little tool right here. Okay, it looks like a little explosion is going off. If you click on that, that's going to be your new layer tool, all right? And by default, it's gonna say layer 1. I'm gonna go ahead and call this exterior walls, okay? And then under color, I'm gonna go ahead and make this blue. Okay, all of the colors that I'm talking about today are all gonna be amongst these basic, like 12 colors or whatever it is right here. These are gonna be all the basic colors that we use in this class. Some people will use the other colors, but most firms, most professionals, they just use the simple 12 colors, okay? So our exterior wall color is going to be blue, all right? I'm gonna go ahead and say okay, and that's all that I'm going to do for that exterior wall, all right? I'm gonna create another one that says interior walls, and we're gonna make this cyan, which is going to be the light color blue. All right, let's go back to our, let's go ahead and create a layer for windows and doors. Call this windows. Now I could create one layer for windows and doors, but I would recommend creating separate ones. The reason being, just like Photoshop and InDesign, you want to be able to turn layers on and off should you want to. So although it might be a little tedious to create, dozens of layers, you will appreciate the few seconds that you invested into creating these layers when you actually have a nice complex floor plan down the road where you need to turn some things off, okay? So it will happen, I guarantee it. Maybe not in this class, but as you start to develop more complex floor plans and elevations, it will happen, okay? So windows, we're gonna go ahead and make those yellow. All right, we're gonna create another layer for doors, and that's also going to be yellow, which it's already going to go ahead and create that. Let's create another one. We're going to call this hatch patterns. All right, and we're going to go ahead and make this gray. All right, I'm going to make this index 9, so color 9 gray. All right. And so all of the colors that we've chosen are going to be the colors that are represented on the screen. Okay, so eventually here in just a second, I'm going to change my different layers of the objects that I've created here. All right, so I've gone ahead and I've created my 5 layers for now, and I'm going to hit the X. All right, so to go ahead and close that properties manager. And if you go back up to the drop-down menu, you'll notice that you have all 5 of the layers that you just created. Okay, so the next step is going to be to change your the objects in your floor plan to the correct layers. All right, so I'm going to select my my exterior walls. I guess you could probably argue that this is an interior wall, but I'm going to go ahead and just pretend for now that it's an exterior wall. All right, so let me select this one. That looks good. Let's select this one. So I have all of my exterior walls selected, and now you can see as they're selected that it currently shows that they're on layer 0. I'm going to go ahead and drop that down over to my exterior walls layer. All right. Notice that all of my walls turned blue. Okay, so that's an easy way for me to identify what those are. And so these are actually pretty typical layer colors. So when you work in an office for a long period of time, you start to understand your office line weights and your office layer structure so that I can look at things and my brain automatically identifies certain things by the color of the line weight. Okay, so I look at certain things and I know that a green line weight is a plumbing fixture, or a cyan line weight is an interior wall. So being that I've looked at these so many times, my brain automatically identifies these objects based off of the line weights that we use. Okay, so you're going to quickly go through and identify all of the objects and assign them layers. All right, so I'm going to select my doors and go ahead and make them doors. I'm going to go ahead and select my windows and add them to my windows layer. Give me just a sec. And we got 2 more. All right, we're gonna go ahead and assign this to my Windows layer, and we're good. All right, so now if I go up to my layers dropdown, I can click on the light bulb of any one of these layers and I can turn them off. Okay, so for example, let's say I want to hide my doors just temporarily. I can click on that light bulb and they'll temporarily go away. Okay, so that's just some of the basic features of the layers tools that we have. All right, I'm going to turn that back on for now. Looks like I missed a couple of these exterior walls. Let's just fix that real quick. All right, so any questions about creating layers or assigning lines layers? Pretty simple, right? Yeah, pretty simple stuff. So let's go ahead and move on to the next part of the exercise, and that's going to be to bring in blocks. Okay, as I mentioned last class, you're going to need to bring in some blocks to start to give your interior spaces some different characteristics. Okay, so by adding things like furniture, beds, you're going to add cabinets and all kinds of tables and whatnot to your plans. That starts to give the rooms that you have some character. Okay, so by placing a couch and a TV and all those different objects in your living room, I can quickly identify what that space is by those little extra details. Okay, you add a bed and a nightstand and some of those objects to your bedroom. I easily know that that's a bedroom and it's not a family room. Okay, so that's just some kind of basic architectural drawing standards. So where might you get some of these blocks? All right, so if you go to the exercise, you're going to notice that I have given you a website called firstandarchitecture.com. All right, if you go to firstandarchitecture.com, you'll get a bunch of free CAD blocks. The goal is not to be drawing furniture. Okay, these things are widely available on the web. I never draw furniture in my office. Nobody does. These things are already made and created for you. Okay, so if you go to firstandarchitecture.com, you can get a bunch of already pre-drawn blocks. A block is just basically an item that comes in as kind of like a grouped object that you can't go through and manipulate all of the little lines unless you actually open up the block and make little individual edits to it. But for the most part, it's one single file of things like couches and actually pretty much anything that you could possibly think of. Okay, so for example, this first set of CAD blocks are all objects that are related to fire trucks, fire safety. Here's a bunch of trees and elevation context, things that might go around your house. Here's different office items like computer screens and desks and furniture. Here's windows for your elevations. I'm going to go ahead and click on the one called Furniture 8, Sofas and Couches. Okay, this is a pretty basic one. These are all sofas, couches, and interior furniture in plan view. Okay, so if I click on that and I scroll down to the bottom, it shows you all of these different objects already created. All right, I'm going to go down, I'm going to click on Download Imperial. All right, and it's going to give you a little zip file at the bottom. I would highly recommend putting these on your flash drive. Okay, even on my flash drive, actually on my cloud storage, I've got thousands of blocks so that anytime I need something, I have all my nice little folders that shows interior elements, exterior elements, plants, trees. I have probably 100 folders of CAD blocks. So the second I need something, I can just download it. I don't have to waste any time looking for it on the internet. So the goal is to, as you are in school, is to start to develop a library of CAD blocks and different elements. In my Revit class, we actually download, we're starting to kind of create a library of three-dimensional objects as you create things in 3D when you use Revit. But for CAD, we're going to go ahead and start to document all of these two-dimensional objects. Okay, so if you double-click on that zip file, here's going to be our file of all of our different furniture blocks. Yes. Okay, so from here, you'll now see that we have all of our different little pieces of furniture. Okay, so how might you bring them from this file to our cabin? Okay. All right, so one object or one option is to select. Notice that when I select it, it selects the entire thing, okay, and not just the little individual line components, okay? So let's say I want to add this little furniture group to my floor plan. I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-C for copy. All right, I'm going to go back over to my floor plan, and under the clipboard up here on your upper ribbon, I'm going to click on paste as block. Okay, and then from here, my furniture will be dropped in. So right here, this cabin is tiny. This cabin's probably like 250 square feet, which is why these chairs look really big. But the nice thing about all of these blocks is that they're to scale. They're the actual size of the furniture. So even though they look really big because my cabin's small, if you actually look at them in comparison to the door, you know the door is 3 feet wide. Well, you know, a nice armchair is probably about 3 feet wide too, maybe even a little bit bigger. So these objects are also all to scale, so you don't need to mess with scaling them larger or smaller unless the intent is to actually show, you know, a larger table, for example. Okay, and if you want to edit these objects, you can double click on them. All right, if you double click on it, it's going to say edit block definition, and it should pop up on the correct one. If you just go ahead and hit OK, it will bring you into a block editor. Okay, and from there you can let's see, save. From there you can explode. If you guys actually, let's go ahead and do that real quick.
Double click. Right?
Yep, double click on the block. Okay, you can click on this. You can type in explode. All right, so now you can start to make edits to this block, and then when you're all done, let's just say that you want this to be a larger coffee table. Like maybe the block is almost perfect, but you just want a couple small changes. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and just edit my table like so. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. It saves the block. And notice that in my floor plan, let's see, sorry, let me go ahead and exit out some of this. Close, see up here in your ribbon, you see this little button that says close block editor. I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'm going to save the changes, and notice that my block has now been updated. Okay, so that's just some basic understanding on how to bring in blocks, how to paste them into your project. Now, they don't always come in sheets like this. Sometimes they are just individual items. Okay, you might have one block file that only has one couch. Okay, sometimes they come in big sheets like this. I personally like to have these options so that I can cycle through all of my different configurations that I have. But sometimes you will get them coming into smaller configurations. Okay, yeah.
Do you have like to put like exact measurements to the blocks, like scales and measurements, or it's okay like?
No, you don't need to show measurements. Next class, is it next class or the class after? We'll look at how to add dimensions and stuff. But no, don't worry about that. They should always come into scale. Okay, and the focus is more on the architecture and not the interior of the cabin. So you shouldn't spend a ton of time playing interior designer, but adding these different elements helps provide character to the spaces that you're designing. Okay, so if you're designing a kitchen, you're going to want to add your kitchen counters. You're going to want to add your sink, your oven, and all of those different elements that you might have. If you need a little help on what that might look like, you can Google typical kitchen layouts. If you've never designed a kitchen, there's plenty of resources online. If I'm here, I'm always, of course, happy to help you as well to kind of design some of those elements. But there's plenty of resources if you just Google those things online. Okay, so that's going to be how to bring in blocks. All right, so pretty simple stuff. I'm going to go ahead and delete this now just for the time being. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about hatches. Okay, so let's say you're starting to think about what the interior flooring is going to be. Okay, well, you could go up to your hatch pattern, and you could, or maybe you have a layer for flooring, and you could go ahead and use the line command, and let's just say we're going to add 1 foot tiles to our project. Okay, so you might do something like this. All right, and we're going to kind of create a grid. All right, I could offset this grid by 1 foot. and I could sit here and I could start to make my, my grid pattern, okay? But that becomes very tedious, and when you start to have complex spaces, that takes a long time. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and look at how to create hatch patterns, all right? So up here under home, you're going to, let's see, this is a little bit different than my office. Right here, under the draw part of your upper ribbon, you're gonna notice this little button right here that says hatch. All right, if you click on the button that says hatch, the next thing that it's going to tell you is to pick an internal point, okay? But before we do that, let's look at some of the different properties that we have up in our ribbon. Okay, so what is that hatch gonna be? The point is to find a pattern that is representative of, in our case, the flooring that we're going to use, okay? So if I scroll down in my patterns, just one second. If I scroll down in my patterns, you can see the various different hatch patterns. This one right here is kind of a 45 degree, as if you had like a 1 foot tile and you turned it 45 degrees, okay? You have here, here's some concrete block hatch patterns, some smaller block hatch patterns, concrete. A lot of them should be kind of defined for you a little bit. A herringbone pattern if maybe you're doing like pavers outside in your patio area. Sand, brass, brick. There's dozens of them if you scroll down. There should even be one for wood flooring.
Oh no.
It may not be a default though. Let's just see. Here's some for some just double lines. Plaster, mud, stars, squares, users, zigzag. So there's a bunch in here. Actually, it looks like hardwood is not a default hatch pattern. But just like blocks, you can go online and you can download hundreds and thousands of different hatch patterns. For example, just the other day in my office, I'm specifying a certain type of stone for the exterior of a building that I'm working on, okay? Well, I contacted the stone manufacturer and I said, hey, I need a hatch pattern that is representative of the stone that I'm putting on this house. Well, they actually have a hatch pattern that they just send me. It's just a AutoCAD pattern file that I can upload into here, and I could actually just put an actual hatch pattern of the actual product that I'm using, okay?
You're gonna put it as a block? Or
No, you do not need to put this as a block. And I know there are other ways to do it, but just kind of keeping it simple for this class, we're just going to go ahead and use the simple hatch pattern tool. For today's exercise, I'm going to go ahead and just use the, let's see, I'm going to use, just saw the one. I'm going to go ahead and use this one right here. All right, that's just going to be kind of like a generic tile pattern. All right, and notice over here, if we continue to scroll over to the right, you have different, you have a scale option, you have an angle option. So we'll look at that in just a second, and also a transparency. But the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select the hatch pattern that I want, and if I go and hover my mouse over the different spaces, it's gonna go ahead and it kind of creates a predefined space for you for where that hatch pattern might be, okay? Before I do that, let me actually just kind of define a couple of my spaces. So let's see, I'm just going to use my layer 0. I'm just going to say that my pattern wants to stop here for now. I can actually go back and delete this here in just a sec. Let me hide my windows and my doors. Okay. And I'm going to go back over here to my hatch button. I'm going to click on the hatch button. I'm going to click on the hatch pattern that I want. And I'm going to go ahead and select this different space. Now, for some reason, if you look at this, it's actually telling me there's a gap somewhere in my space. Maybe not. We'll see. But I'll go ahead and select this space right here. Okay. So right now, it's basically completely white. The reason why it's completely white and it's not the pattern that we saw is because the scale of the pattern is too small. It's so fine, the scale is so fine that it's basically a white blob. Okay, so if I click on my hatch pattern, I can now make a few different edits. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the scale. I'm going to go ahead and bump this up maybe 50 times. Okay, so notice that when I increase the scale by 50, I now have that pattern that I was originally looking for. All right, so if I go back and I use my measuring tool, I can actually see that these tiles are 6.5 inches. All right, I'm not going to be a stickler on whether or not they're exactly a foot, but you do want to have something that looks to be the correct scale. So ask yourself, do you want 1 foot tiles, 2 foot tiles? I don't really care. This is not an interior design class, but you do want something that kind of makes sense, okay? So let's say I want these to be a foot. Right now they're 6.5 inches. I'm just going to go ahead and double this one more time. And those are going to be about 1 foot tiles. Now, right now they're also not really the direction that I want, okay? So if I go up here under angle, I can go ahead and type in 45 and hit enter, and it will rotate that hatch pattern 45 degrees so that the tiles are the direction that I want, okay? And from there, I'm going to have my hatch pattern. Now the goal for all hatch patterns is that you don't want them to have line weights, or you don't want the pattern to be so abrupt that it kind of take over the floor plane a little bit. So another thing you might do is you might add a hatch transparency. So I might go like 50. Okay, notice that the hatch pattern is now a little bit more subtle, okay? So now I don't need those lines. I can go ahead and get rid of that if you don't want them, okay? And that's gonna be how to create a hatch pattern. Now let's say you need to make a couple different edits, okay? Let's say maybe you want this to actually kind of go inside this other space as well. Well, you can click on the hatch pattern and notice that kind of like when you're working in InDesign or Illustrator, if you were to click on the direct selection tool and you could start to move around those different points, well, you can do the same thing with the hatch pattern. Okay, so let's say maybe I needed to move this down here for whatever reason. I know you wouldn't actually do this, but you can actually manipulate all of the different, all of these different points around the spaces to kind of get a little bit more of a custom look that you might be looking for. Okay, another object. If you actually, right now, if I take my mouse and I hover it over one of those points, you'll notice that it gives you a couple more options. Okay, I haven't selected anything. All I did was move my mouse over one of those points, and I'm given a couple options to add vertex or remove vertex. So if you have too many, well, you can hit remove. What if maybe I want to bring it inside of my other room? Well, I can also click on add. All right, and notice when I click on add, it allows me to go place that point at another spot inside my house. Okay, that didn't really do anything, as you can see, but if I go and hover over again and I add another vertex, I can go ahead and start to continue to add my hatch into other spaces. Another option would be to just go and click on your hatch again and select on a new space, but it won't always select the spaces exactly how you want. If you noticed in the beginning when I actually have those doors, well, if I would have selected that space, it would have actually created the hatch around the door. Well, that wouldn't have been perfect. I would have needed to go and edit the hatch so that it fills the space correctly. Okay, so I'm gonna add one more vertex, and I will fill up my cabin with kind of a flooring pattern. All right, and that's kind of the basics of creating hatch patterns. Any questions on that at all before we move on to our last step for the day? Yeah.
So in mine, when it filled it in, it kind of did little circles around certain points, like red circles.
So what that means is if you create the hatch pattern and it won't kind of select the space that you're trying to create, the reason why is that you probably have a gap somewhere. If you don't have a perfectly enclosed space, it won't create the hatch. Okay, so you could have a 1/2 inch gap between the lines. Maybe you didn't use the fillet command, and that tiny little space won't allow you to create a predetermined boundary. And so what it's telling you, if you see those little red lines, it's telling you that there's a conflict at those particular areas.
Because it did make the hatch for the area that I selected,
Mm-hmm.
but it just circled like the points.
Okay, let me come look at it in just a few minutes. It sounded like it still worked, but I'll help kind of figure out why that might be. Okay, and I think if you actually look at the Canvas website, it actually tells you to also add a hatch pattern to your walls. Okay, typically a lot of times you'll have your exterior walls as having a nice kind of soft gray hatch pattern inside them. So if I click on my hatch, I can go up to the very top where it says solid. All right, and I can go ahead and click on the different spaces inside my walls, and I can give a hatch pattern, a solid hatch pattern to my exterior walls. Okay, see how I'm doing that? Pretty easy stuff. Okay, so like right here, I just got that little message saying a closed boundary could not be determined. There's probably, even though it decided to still do it, but it looks like I'm okay. All right, so right there, that kind of gives you your basic floor plan. We've looked at how to establish layers. We looked at how to create layers. We looked at how to create hatch patterns. Now the last thing that we want to look at is how do we plot, okay? How do we make this actually useful, all right? The reason why we create these layers, or one of the reasons why we create these layers in the first place, is so that we can have a nice architectural floor plan that has some meaning, okay? We want to have those nice, thick boundary lines as a part of our plot. Otherwise, all of the line work reads the same, right? All right, so let's look at how to plot this. All right, so last class we looked at how to plot it by typing in PLOT. All right, we looked at how to define all of these different options to get the floor plan onto a PDF, okay? So the next thing that we're going to create is a pen style. The pen style, as I mentioned earlier, tells the AutoCAD software what each of these lines mean, okay? So to create the pen style, you're going to go ahead and click on the little drop-down menu, all right? And you're going to scroll down to the very bottom, and you're going to click on New, okay? So you're going to click on New, and you're going to be given the option of how to create your pen style, all right? We're going to go ahead and click on the Start from Scratch pen style, click on Next, and we're going to give it a name. So I had already created one earlier, but I'll create a new one. I'm going to call this DVC pen, all right? And I'm going to click on Next. And then from there, I'm going to click on the Plot Style Table Editor. All right, and from here I can go through and I can assign properties for each of the colors that we have in our project. All right, so I'm going to do just a few of these, as these are the colors that we've used in our project. And I've given all of the different line types on our exercise 21. So for example, our exterior walls, or our blue color 5, is going to be equivalent to 0.5 millimeters. All right, so if I click on color number 5, which is blue, I can go over here and I'm going to change this to a solid line, okay? So when it plots, it could plot it in a variety of different lines. The first thing that I'm going to select is that I want the line to be just a basic solid line. And then under line weight, I'm going to select 0.5 millimeters. All right? And that's going to be it for now. There are other things that we could add to this, but for now, that's all we're going to go ahead and use. All right. So if we go ahead and look at the next one, interior walls, which is going to be cyan, is going to be 0.35 millimeters. All right. So I'm going to click on cyan. I'm going to do line type solid. Line weight is going to be 0.35. All right. And let's just do the last couple really quickly. Windows and doors are going to be 0.25. which is going to be yellow, line type solid, line weight 0.25. All right, and the last one is color 9, which is our hatch pattern. We're going to also make that a line type of solid, and I'm going to make this 0.18. It can even be a little bit smaller. All of these line weights that I'm giving you, they're not set in stone. If you plot your file, you're not getting the results that you want. You can go and edit the pen style, okay? Typically, hatch patterns want to be about the lightest line weight possible because you don't want them to dominate the floor plan. So 0.18 is what I mentioned on the exercise. 0.09 is also a common one for hatch patterns as well. All right, so from here I've now established some of our basic colors. If you create more colors, you can go through and add those to your different pen style, but for just the basics, those 4 will do the trick for today. The next thing I'm going to do before I hit save and close, I'm going to save my pen style so that next class I can upload it into my AutoCAD file. Remember, if you save your pen style to these computers, it's going to delete it at the end of the night. So the goal is to not be doing this whole pen thing every single class. You typically do it one time and that's it, okay? In my office, we have a FCGA pen style. I don't ever have to worry about it. It's been created since the beginning of time in my office, and that's the pen style that we use for plotting all of our documents, okay? So we know that when we plot things, it's always going to be exactly the same. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click on Save As. I'm going to save this first right here under plot styles. So this is going to put the plot style on the computer that we're working on. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hit Save, and that saves it on the computer. And I'm going to go ahead and click on it again, and I'm going to save it to my thumb drive so that if I need to plot maybe on Monday or Wednesday, we have a file that has all of our line weights already established. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save it to this week's folder, DVC pen, and I'll hit save. Okay, so from there we've saved it in 2 different locations. I'm going to go ahead and hit save and close and finish. And now notice up here that my plot style is assigned as DVC pen. Okay, so now I know that all of my line weights will be plotted correctly. So let's go ahead and plot what we currently have right here, and let's see how this turns out. Before I do that, let me just make sure. Let me make sure that everything is on the correct layer. I think we should be good. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go to Plot. And I'm going to go ahead and make the plotter PDF. So I'm going to go to DWG to PDF, or you can go to Adobe PDF. They'll both work exactly the same. I'm going to go ahead and create a display window around my project, like so. And on the instructions, this is going to be the first time where we're going to be plotting to scale. Okay, I didn't really care about this last time, but in the instructions for exercise 21, it tells you to plot to 1/4 inch scale. So when you read the drawing, that it's actually to scale. So I'm going to uncheck fit to paper, and under scale I'm going to click on 1/4 inch is equal to 1 foot. All right, notice that when I do that, I don't have any red lines around the 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. That means that the drawing at that scale will fit on the paper size that I'm assigning it, so that's good. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and center the plot so that my floor plan is right in the middle of the sheet of paper. And I'm going to click on OK. All right, go ahead and hit continue. I'm just going to save this to my desktop for now. All right, so a couple things didn't work out the way that I wanted to, but I'm going to go back here in just a sec to figure out why that didn't work. Ideally, my hatching in my wall should have been gray, and the hatching of my actually none of them actually plotted correctly at all. So let me go back and look at that while you guys go ahead and get started, and I will show you this again in just a second. I think I might have skipped one step in the plot in creating that plot style. All right, so go ahead and get started. Start on the participation. So spend about 15 minutes looking for some images. If you want, actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and take a break. So by the time you guys come back, I'll tell you why that didn't work correctly. But let's take a break. Let's come back in 10 minutes. So that's just 2 minutes after 7:30. All right, so I'll see you guys in 10 minutes.
How many inches normally, like for the step?
11 inches.
11.
Oh. I know exactly what I did wrong.